It was one of those nights where the house felt too quiet. The kind where even the hum of the fridge sounds louder than it should. I'd been up late watching an old detective show, half asleep on the couch, when the sound hit me. This deep, solid bang that didn't belong in a peaceful suburban night. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. Maybe the wind slammed a loose gate or the cat knocked something over. Then came another bang, louder this time, sharp and deliberate. My heart started racing before my brain could even form a thought. It wasn't a knock. It was a pound. The kind that demands attention. The kind that carries entitlement. I turned down the TV and listened. 3 more thuds, quick and impatient, followed by a man's voice shouting, "Open the door! HOA security!" HOA security? At 3 in the morning, I blinked in confusion. We don't even have an OA. Our street's too old for that nonsense. Everyone here's owned their homes for decades. We're a mix of retirees, blue-collar families, and a few young couples. No one here needs some clipboard, wielding busybody telling us what color our mailboxes should be. I slipped off the couch, my heart thudding hard enough to feel it in my throat. The knocking continued, more like kicking now. I crept to the window beside the front door and parted the blinds just an inch. A man stood on my porch, shining a flashlight straight at the peephole like he knew exactly what he was doing. He was wearing dark cargo pants, a puffy jacket, and what looked like a tactical vest over it. The words, "Neighborhood Enforcement Unit," were printed across his chest in reflective white lettering. A badge of some sort hung from his neck, glinting under the porch light. He looked official, if you didn't know better. But I knew better. Behind him sat an old SUV, maybe a 2005 Tahoe, with a light bar duct taped to the roof and the same Neighborhood Enforcement Unit logo spray painted across the side. It looked like something straight out of a cheap movie set. I called through the door, my voice shaking slightly but trying to sound steady. "Sir, who are you? You've got the wrong house. We don't have an HOA here." He barked back immediately, his tone full of authority that wasn't earned. "You're in violation of Subdivision Code 23B. Overgrown vegetation, improper lighting, and failure to comply with nighttime noise standards. Step outside." It took me a second to even process that. Overgrown vegetation. Noise standards. It's the middle of November. Everything in the yard's dead, and the loudest thing in this house was my old TV. "I'm calling the sheriff," I said. Louder this time. "Leave my property." He laughed. A deep, dismissive laugh that made my skin crawl. "You can call whoever you want, ma'am, but by the time they show up, you'll have a fine for noncompliance and obstruction of a neighborhood officer. Open the door." Something inside me snapped from fear to anger. Who the hell did this guy think he was? I wasn't about to let some fake Rene cop bully me in my own home. Then, from down the hallway, I heard a door open. Soft footsteps, measured, deliberate. My son Mark appeared in the dim light wearing just sweatpants, his expression calm but alert. He'd only been home a few weeks after finishing his last tour with the Marines. The kid could sleep through thunder, but apparently not through the sound of someone trying to break into our home. He looked at me, then at the door. "What's going on?" I whispered. "Some guy says he's HOA security. He's demanding I open the door." Mark frowned, listening for a second as another loud bang echoed through the wood. "That's not knocking," he said quietly. "That's someone trying to intimidate you." I nodded, trying to keep my breathing steady. Mark motioned for me to step back. He disappeared into the guest room for a moment and came back with the small pistol he legally carried in a lockbox. He didn't point it. He just held it low, ready, his military training kicking in like muscle memory. I picked up my phone and dialed 911, my hands trembling. The dispatcher answered quickly. 911. "What's your emergency?" "There's a man pretending to be law enforcement outside my house," I said, trying not to cry. "He says he's from the OA, but we don't have one. He's banging on my door and yelling threats." As I was speaking, there was another heavy thud, and this time I heard the wood creak. The dispatcher's voice sharpened. "Mom, do not open the door. Stay on the line. Officers are on their way. Can you describe him?" I started describing everything, the fake badge, the SUV, the jacket. But before I could finish, the man outside shouted again. "Last warning. Open the door, or I'll enter under authority of Subdivision Enforcement." Subdivision Enforcement. That was it. The stupidest phrase I'd ever heard. I almost laughed if I hadn't been shaking so badly. And then the sound I'll never forget. The splintering crack of wood giving way. The door frame split inward as the man kicked again, harder. The chain lock caught, but the door swung open a few inches, enough for me to see his face clearly for the first time. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't security. He was just some random man in his 40s, Unshaven, red-eyed, probably fueled by ego and caffeine. Mark moved before I could even react. In one smooth motion, he stepped into the hallway, standing squarely between me and the door. His voice dropped into that low, steady register I'd only ever heard once before, when he was saying goodbye before deployment. "Stop." Right there, he said. The man froze, surprised to find someone other than a half-asleep homeowner waiting for him. I said, "Stop," Mark repeated. "You take one more step inside, and that'll be the last mistake you ever make." For a few long seconds, no one moved. The air was so thick with tension I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. Then the man's bravado faltered. His fake badge swung awkwardly on its lanyard as his hands went up slightly. You can't threaten an officer," he stammered. Mark didn't blink. "You're not an officer." The dispatcher was still on the phone, whispering updates into my ear. "Units are 2 minutes out. Stay inside. Stay calm." The fake HOA cop took a slow step backward, muttering something about mistaken address. His flashlight beam jittered over the floor, catching the glint of Mark's weapon, and that seemed to shake him out of whatever delusion he'd been in. Then, as quickly as it began, he bolted, ran straight down the driveway, jumped into his SUV, and sped off, tires screeching. Mark waited at the doorway, steady as stone, until we saw the red and blue lights crest the hill at the end of the street. Only then did he exhale and lower his arm. I was still shaking when the sheriff's deputies arrived. One of them looked at our splintered doorframe, then at the tire tracks leading away, and said, "Ma'am, you're not the first call tonight." And that was when I realized this wasn't random. This man had been making rounds, trying to scam people while they slept. But he'd picked the wrong house to kick in. The flashing lights painted the street in streaks of red and blue. It was the kind of light that doesn't just illuminate, it exposes. Every porch, every mailbox, every shadowed corner of the street looked raw and naked under that glow. 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled up fast, the crunch of tires on gravel sounding almost like thunder after the quiet that followed the intruder's escape. Mark stepped out onto the porch, calm but alert, gun holstered and hands raised just slightly to show he wasn't a threat. The deputies came out, weapons drawn but careful, scanning the area. "Sheriff's Department!" one called out. "Anyone inside need medical attention?" I shook my head quickly. "We're okay! He's gone! Drove off just before you got here!" The deputy nodded, motioning to the other officer to clear the yard. I stood there shivering, the cold air biting at my skin through the torn robe I hadn't realized I was still wearing. My front door hung crooked on one hinge, the chain lock snapped, the frame splintered like firewood. That door had stood for 15 years, and some stranger had shattered it in under 2 minutes. The deputy, a stocky man with a mustache and kind eyes, turned back to us. "You said he identified himself as HOA security." "Yes," I said. "He had a fake badge, an SUV with some kind of light bar, even a logo. Said he was neighborhood enforcement. We don't even have an HOA." Mark crossed his arms, his voice steady. He wasn't just pretending. He was trying to force entry. Said we were in violation of something, started kicking the door before my mom could finish her call. The deputy nodded, jotting notes in a little notebook. "Yeah, that tracks. We've been getting reports all week. Guy's been going door to door in different neighborhoods, mostly older folks. Tries to scare them into paying cash fines for fake violations." I blinked. "So this has happened before? 3 times that we know of," the deputy said. "But this is the first time he tried to break in. Most people just gave him money to make him go away." He looked at the busted door again, then at Mark. "He made a bad call tonight." Mark said nothing, but his jaw tightened. The quiet confidence he had in moments like this was unsettling and comforting all at once. He'd spent years in situations far worse than a suburban break-in, but it was still strange seeing him like that. So controlled, so ready. Another officer came jogging back up from the end of the street. "We got a plate number, Sergeant. Neighbor down the block's got a door cam. Looks like an older Tahoe, dark blue. Partial tag starts with BH4. The sergeant grunted. "All right, let's get a bullet out. Probably still in the area." He turned back to me. "We'll have a unit sit outside for a while, just in case he gets dumb and circles back. You two should stay inside and lock up whatever you can." I looked at my shattered door and almost laughed. "Lock it up with what?" The deputy smiled softly. "Fair point. We'll get a board-up crew on their way." As they started moving around the yard, shining flashlights in the bushes and taking pictures for the report, I finally let myself breathe. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. Mark took it gently from me, checked the call log, then set it down on the kitchen counter. "Set down, Mom," he said quietly. You're white as a ghost. I'm fine, I insist, though my voice came out thinner than I meant. I can't believe that actually happened. Right here. He sat across from me, elbows on the table, watching the deputies outside through the blinds. The steady flash of their lights reflected off his face, giving his calm expression a strange kind of hardness. I told you before, he said after a moment. Predators always test the weak first. He thought he was knocking on an easy target. Wuss, he misjudged, I said with a shaky laugh. Mark didn't laugh back. People like that, they rely on fear. They walk around like they own the place until someone shows them they don't. The way he said it sent a chill through me. It wasn't anger in his tone. It was something colder, more final. That Marine discipline hadn't left him, not even a little. Outside, the deputies' radios crackled. One of them called out something about a vehicle matched 2 neighborhoods over. The sergeant leaned into his radio and replied, "Copy that. Approach with caution. Suspect may be impersonating law enforcement." For a few tense minutes, the whole street buzzed with activity. More lights, more cars. Neighbors started poking their heads out of windows or stepping onto porches in robes and pajamas. It was the most excitement our sleepy street had seen in years. Then, as suddenly as it began, a message came through on the radio: suspect detained. Vehicle stopped near County Line Road. Fake credentials and airsoft pistol recovered. The sergeant let out a long breath. Got him. He looked at Mark and me, offering a half smile. He won't be bothering anyone else tonight. Relief hit me like a wave, followed by exhaustion so deep I could barely sit upright. My whole body felt like it had been wrung out. Mark walked to the door, and leaned against the frame, looking out at the mess left behind. The sergeant finished his notes and handed me a copy of the incident report. We'll be in touch about court dates. You might be called to testify. That man's facing impersonation charges, unlawful entry, and a few others. Pretty serious stuff. I nodded, still dazed. Thank you, officer. He tipped his hat slightly. And thank your son. He handled himself like a pro. Mark didn't say much, just gave a quiet nod in return. After they left, the house fell silent again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. It was heavier, loaded with the memory of those sounds, the pounding, the shouting, the splintering wood. Every creak of the house made my muscles tense. Mark spent the next hour boarding up the door with scrap plywood from the shed, refusing to let me help. Go rest, he kept saying, but I couldn't. Not yet. When he finally finished, we sat on the couch together. The glow of the TV flickered across the room, but neither of us was really watching. I looked at him, studying his face. The faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his hands rested calmly on his knees even after everything that had happened. You didn't even flinch, I said quietly. He shrugged. Training. Then, after a pause, you learn to control the fear. Doesn't mean it's not there. We sat in silence for a while. Outside, the red and blue lights faded away one by one, until all that was left was the soft hum of the streetlights. Before heading to bed, I turned back to him. I don't think I've ever been more grateful for your timing. He smiled faintly. You raised me to protect what's mine. Guess that includes you. I laughed softly then, the sound breaking the last bit of tension still stuck in the air. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, landing on the rough plywood covering the doorway. It wasn't pretty, but it was solid, and that felt like enough. Later that day, a deputy called to confirm what we already knew. The man had a record of mile-long fraud, impersonation, trespassing. He'd been running his little HOA enforcement scam for months, moving from neighborhood to neighborhood. But thanks to one bad choice at 3 in the morning, his luck had finally run out. And as I watched Mark sip his coffee, calm and unbothered as if the night before had been just another drill, I realized something simple and comforting: evil has a way of knocking when it thinks no one's awake. But sometimes, it finds a Marine waiting on the other side.